Inequality between African Americans and their white peers remains stark, as our next guests lay out in their new book, 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. Co-authors Ebony Reed and Louise Story join Hari Srinivasan to discuss possible solutions to closing that gap.
Christian, thanks. Louise Story, Ebony Reed, thank you both for joining us. Your book is called 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. Ebony, let me start with you. Well, explain that 15 cents on the dollar phrase.
Sure. Thank you for having us. 15 cents is the typical amount of wealth a Black family has in America for every $1 a typical white family has. And this is data from the Federal Reserve.
Louise, why write this story in the first place?
Well, Ebony and I were working together at the Wall Street Journal in the summer of 2020. And as colleagues and as friends, we started having many of the same conversations I'm sure you had and many people you know had, which is, wow, where do things stand on race today? And in particular, since we were at the Wall Street Journal, we were wondering, where do things stand on race and money? And so we read some books together. We looked up some data. I'll never forget when we crunched the data and came up with how many cents on the dollar it was. I called up Ebony and I said, did you realize this figure? And we thought it was fascinating. And we soon found out by looking around that there was not a book on Black-White Wealth Gap through history. It didn't exist coming to the present. And we decided we were the perfect pair to write it.
Louise, I can understand in the context of what was happening with the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd, why it was resonant to think about that. But there, you can also say that there's a wealth gap between the very rich Americans and average Americans, right? What was fascinating to you about kind of the dimension of race in this?
Well, actually, there is a more severe wealth gap among races than there are just among white Americans. So you're correct. There's a distributional effect that affects all people, and there is a wealth gap among white Americans. But when you look at white versus Black Americans at every income level, there is a wealth gap.